The morning sun peeked over the jagged peaks of the Grand Teton Range, casting long shadows across the trail as Alex tightened the straps of his backpack. At 23, he was fit, curious, and an avid lover of nature. This was his third solo hiking trip, and he had meticulously planned every detail. With his GPS tracker turned on and his camera mounted on his shoulder strap, he started the trail that looped around a remote ridge known for its stunning vistas and unpredictable weather. Birds chirped in the trees, and the air was crisp with the scent of pine. He paused often, photographing wildflowers, recording short video logs, and marveling at the vast silence of the wilderness. His final message, sent just before noon, was a photo of him standing on a narrow outcrop with the valley sprawling far below and snow patches dotting the cliffs above. Made it to the ridge. Absolutely unreal up here, the caption read. It was the last anyone would hear from him. When Alex failed to check in that evening, his parents grew worried but hoped it was a simple signal issue. By morning, concern turned to fear. Calls to the park rangers initiated a response, and within hours, a team was dispatched. Helicopters scanned the high ridges, and volunteers combed the trails he had logged in his plans. Days passed, then weeks. Not a single trace, no gear, no footprints, no signs of struggle. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Rumors swirled: animal attack, freak fall, or simply lost and buried by a rockslide. But nothing could be confirmed. The terrain was unforgiving, and the weather quickly shifted, erasing potential clues. After 2 weeks of exhaustive searching, the official operation was called off. A simple wooden cross was placed at the trailhead by his family, where fresh flowers often appeared, left by those who hadn't forgotten the hiker who walked into the mountains and never came back. The command center was set up near the trailhead, a hastily erected tent surrounded by vehicles, satellite dishes, and worried faces. Park rangers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers moved quickly, organizing maps, GPS trackers, and radio equipment. Helicopters began sweeping the higher elevations, their blades slicing through the thin mountain air as they scanned the craggy cliffs and tree-covered slopes. Search dogs barked restlessly, picking up scents that quickly vanished into the wilderness. The air held a quiet urgency. Everyone knew that in these mountains, time was the real enemy. Alex's last known location had been pinned using the GPS metadata from the photo he had sent. It showed him on a narrow ridge not far from a section notorious among rangers for its sudden drop-offs and unstable rock ledges. The initial hope was that he had taken a wrong turn or gotten stuck, possibly sheltering in place waiting for help. But as hours turned to days, hope began to dim. The weather grew harsher, storms rolled through unexpectedly, drenching the trails in sleet and wind. Helicopter flights became more difficult. Fresh snow began to cover the paths, erasing signs of passage and pushing the searchers into more desperate strategies. Family and friends camped nearby, holding onto any scrap of hope. Volunteers arrived daily, fellow hikers, climbers, even strangers moved by the news. Flyers with Alex's face were posted on trail signs and town notice boards. His story made local headlines, and for a time, the whole region watched, waited, and prayed. The forest, however, remained silent. After nearly 2 weeks of searching over rugged terrain, with no new leads and worsening weather, the official effort was reluctantly suspended. The announcement hit the family like a wave. Though unofficial searches would continue for a while longer, the Park Service had done all it could. A memorial stone was placed near the point he was last seen, surrounded by small tokens, bracelets, written notes, and a laminated copy of his final photo. The mountain had taken him, and no one knew how or why. Nearly 11 months had passed since Alex's disappearance, and the Grand Teton wilderness had returned to its quiet rhythm. Snow had come and gone, and summer now stretched across the range, bringing life back to the alpine meadows. The incident had faded from headlines, but for the park's veteran ranger, Tom Grady, it was far from forgotten. A seasoned naturalist and tracker with over 2 decades of experience, Tom had helped lead the original search and had never quite let go of the mystery. On a clear morning in early July, he set out alone on a routine aerial survey intended to monitor eagle nesting activity along the high ridges. It was part of an ongoing wildlife study, but for Tom, it was also a chance to revisit terrain that had haunted him for nearly a year. Piloting a small Park Service helicopter, Tom hovered above the granite cliffs and sharp drop-offs that formed the jagged backbone of the Tetons. With binoculars in hand, he scanned the sheer rock faces where golden eagles were known to build their enormous nests. Most were undisturbed, carefully balanced on impossible ledges, built from thick branches and scattered bones. But then, something caught his eye, a flash of silver among the twisted sticks in one of the higher nests perched near an isolated bluff. It was odd. Eagles often collected bones, fur, and even small human litter, but this looked different. The shape was too angular, too out of place. Tom circled the area again, hovering closer. The glint had come from something metallic, partially buried in the nest material. As the eagle soared overhead, displeased by the intrusion, Tom spotted something else: fabric. Torn, faded, sun-bleached, but unmistakably synthetic. A strip of nylon, possibly from a backpack. His stomach tightened. He snapped several photos, marked the GPS location, and radioed it into base. "I found something unusual in a nest on the North Ridge. Might be worth checking. Could be nothing, but it could be something." Though he'd seen many strange things in the wilderness, something about this nest felt different, eerily out of place, yet undeniably familiar. The cliff was steep and unforgiving, its jagged face carved by centuries of wind and ice. Reaching the eagle's nest was no simple task. The nest itself was perched on a narrow rock ledge, jutting out like a defiant shelf hundreds of feet above the forest floor. Tom Grady knew this would be dangerous. The helicopter had dropped him off at a plateau just above the site, and now he was roped in, slowly descending with careful precision. The silence around him was immense, broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the distant cry of the very eagle whose nest he was approaching. He had rappelled into tight spots before, but something about this felt different. The weight of curiosity, and perhaps long-held guilt for never having found Alex, pushed him onward. As he drew closer, the nest came into full view. It was massive, constructed of thick branches, moss, and scraps of fur and feathers. Golden eagles often scavenged, and their nests were known to contain odd items: animal bones, shiny wrappers, even lost hiking gear on rare occasions. But this was different. Carefully, Tom swung onto the ledge beside the nest, anchoring himself securely. The eagle that had been circling above let out a shriek but kept its distance, watching. Tom examined the contents. At first glance, it looked like any other large raptor nest, but buried beneath a layer of twigs and bones, partially hidden, he saw it: a torn piece of high-performance fabric, faded but unmistakably the color of the jacket Alex had worn the day he vanished. Next to it, almost completely camouflaged by years of debris, was a backpack, shredded, sun-damaged, and stuck with feathers and dirt. His heart raced. This wasn't just discarded gear, this was human. Then he saw the most shocking item: a small, dirt-covered GoPro camera lodged in the far side of the nest. Its lens was cracked but intact. Tom reached out with gloved hands, brushing aside twigs as gently as possible, careful not to disturb the structure too much. Retrieving the GoPro, he noticed it was scratched and dented, but the memory card compartment appeared sealed. Could it still work? He took a breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just a coincidence. These items hadn't been dragged here randomly. Somehow, in a tragic twist of fate, pieces of Alex's last moments had ended up in an eagle's nest, preserved in silence high above the world that had searched for him. Tom radioed in again, this time his voice firm, grim, confirmed. "I've found personal effects. Belongings potentially linked to the missing hiker from last year. Request recovery team immediately." As he waited, crouched beside the massive nest, the eagle continued to circle silently overhead, as if guarding a secret the mountain had hidden far too long. Back at the ranger station, the atmosphere was tense but electric. The items recovered from the eagle's nest had been carefully transported down the mountain and delivered to the small evidence lab tucked in the back of the headquarters. Park rangers, investigators, and a forensics technician from the regional office gathered in a hushed semicircle around the table where the damaged GoPro camera now sat. Tom stood silently among them, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the device. It had become a symbol of hope that maybe, after all these months, the truth about what had happened to Alex would finally come to light. The technician, a quiet, meticulous man named Raj, worked gently. The outer casing was cracked and partly melted from sun exposure, but the memory card slot was still intact. With surgical precision, he extracted the micro SD card and inserted it into a recovery reader connected to his laptop. The room fell completely silent as the screen blinked and loaded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, click, folders appeared. Video files. Dozens of them, all timestamped from the day of Alex's disappearance. Several were corrupt or partially overwritten, but a handful had survived. The first playable video began with Alex's familiar voice. Day 3. Heading toward the East Ridge. Weather's clear. Gonna get some great shots from up there. The camera shook slightly as he walked, capturing panoramic views of the valley below. He laughed as he filmed a marmot scurrying across the rocks. Another clip showed him seated on a narrow ledge, sipping water and talking about how peaceful the place was. The footage was personal, calm, ordinary, even. Then the final video loaded. It was shorter and shakier. The camera had been placed on a small tripod facing outward toward a cliff edge. Alex stepped into the frame, positioning himself for what looked like a selfie shot with the vast peaks behind him. He was smiling. Then, in the background, a large shadow passed overhead, an eagle. He turned to watch it, and the camera wobbled as he suddenly stood up, apparently trying to follow the bird's flight path with another shot. What happened next was rapid and horrifying. As he edged closer to the cliff, likely attempting to film the soaring eagle, his foot slipped on loose gravel. There was a jolt, the camera tumbled, and in the chaotic blur of sky and rock, a brief, distant cry could be heard, then silence. The video ended abruptly. Everyone in the room stood frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. It became clear, Alex had not been attacked or abducted. He hadn't vanished without a trace. He had simply miscalculated, one wrong step in pursuit of a beautiful moment. The eagle, perhaps curious or opportunistic, had later scavenged parts of the scene, dragging pieces of his gear back to its high nest. The mystery that had consumed so many for nearly a year had finally begun to unravel, not with drama, but with tragic simplicity. The following days were filled with a quiet intensity as experts from various fields, wildlife biologists, forensic analysts, and experienced trackers, gathered to piece together the story that the recovered footage had only begun to tell. The video had provided a critical clue, but now came the painstaking work of validating it with physical evidence and environmental data. Using the GPS coordinates embedded in the final video file, the team pinpointed the exact location where Alex had likely fallen. The spot matched a narrow section of trail that skirted a steep ravine, an area that had been nearly inaccessible during the initial search due to snow and unstable rock conditions. Drone surveys were conducted over the ravine, revealing fragments of color that matched Alex's clothing caught among rocks and crevices. Far below, a small search team, now armed with new information and a much clearer idea of what to look for, descended into the ravine cautiously. There, partially buried under stones and brush, they discovered more of Alex's gear, his water bottle, a torn notebook, and fragments of a jacket. Time in the harsh mountain environment had taken their toll, but there was no longer any doubt. A forensic anthropologist examined the area and determined that Alex had likely died on impact from a severe fall, instantaneous, with no signs of prolonged suffering. It was a small but deeply important comfort to his family. The eagle's nest, once a mystery, was now understood within the context of natural behavior. Golden eagles, especially in high alpine environments, often scavenge remains and carry objects, both organic and man-made, back to their nests. It wasn't malicious or even unusual. It was nature in its raw, pragmatic form. The discovery led to a re-examination of past search efforts. Had the team been able to search that specific ravine more thoroughly, perhaps they might have found Alex sooner. But given the treacherous conditions at the time, steep terrain, rapidly changing weather, and the sheer size of the wilderness, it became clear that even the most coordinated effort could have missed such a remote location. In presentations to park authorities and the public, the search team carefully reconstructed the timeline. Alex had been climbing to get a better angle for filming the eagle, lost footing on loose gravel, and fell. His backpack and camera likely detached during the fall and were later scavenged by the eagle. The nest had inadvertently become a time capsule, preserving fragments of the mystery that no human searcher had been able to uncover. The final report was clinical, detailed, and respectful. It acknowledged not just the facts, but the emotion behind the search, the dedication of the volunteers, the tireless efforts of rangers like Tom, and the resilience of a family that never gave up hope. There was no foul play, no dramatic twist, only the stark truth of how quickly nature can shift from breathtaking to unforgiving. And in that truth, a kind of closure emerged, fragile but real. The sun hung low over the horizon as the family gathered at the trailhead of the park, the place where Alex had begun his final hike nearly a year ago. The once vivid pain that had gripped them in the early days of his disappearance had softened, but not vanished. Now, with the truth finally known, they could mourn with understanding, not uncertainty. Tom Grady stood nearby, not in uniform, but quietly present, his weathered face marked by the weight of the past year. He had no official role that day, but he wouldn't miss it for the world. This was a moment he had quietly hoped for, even if it came wrapped in sadness. A small group had gathered, close friends, a few local hikers who had joined the initial search, and park staff who had come to know Alex's story as more than a case file. They stood in a semicircle at the edge of the trail, beneath a tall pine where a wooden memorial post had been erected. A small bronze plaque had been installed on it earlier that morning. It bore Alex's name, the dates of his life, and a simple engraving of the Grand Teton skyline. Beneath it, in quiet lettering, were the words, "He followed the beauty of the wild, and it took him home." His mother stepped forward, holding a folded piece of paper. Her voice trembled as she read from it, not a eulogy, but a letter to Alex. She spoke of his adventurous heart, his endless curiosity, the way he always looked at the sky like it held some secret just for him. She thanked the people who had searched for him, and she thanked the ranger who didn't stop wondering. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't break. She ended with a promise, "You're not lost anymore. We know your story now. And we'll carry it with us." As the ceremony closed, Alex's father stepped forward and placed a smooth river stone on the base of the memorial, followed by others, each person adding one until a small cairn stood there, a humble tower of remembrance. Then came the most powerful moment. A friend of Alex's activated the GoPro, newly repaired and cleaned, now containing only the peaceful clips from his journey before the fall. They had chosen not to keep the final video in circulation. It was too painful, too raw, but the earlier moments showed him laughing, filming the sunrise, commenting on a squirrel that kept following him. It was Alex, alive and joyful, exactly how his loved ones wanted to remember him. After the service, people lingered. Some wandered quietly down the trail, some sat in silence. The mountains stood still, their shadows stretching longer as dusk approached. In the fading light, the memorial gleamed softly, catching the last warm rays of sun. It was not a grand monument, but it didn't need to be. It stood for a young man who had loved the wilderness, who had seen the world with wonder, and whose story had finally found its end, carried home not just by the people who searched, but by the very nature he so deeply loved. Evening descended slowly over the Grand Teton Range, painting the sky in rich hues of orange, lavender, and gold. The jagged peaks, dusted with the remnants of summer snow, stood tall and quiet, silent guardians of the wilderness that stretched endlessly below. Far beneath their watch, the forests whispered with wind, rivers glinted like silver ribbons through the valleys, and shadows deepened with every passing moment. The land, ancient and indifferent, carried on as it always had, unmoved by human tragedy or triumph. High above the valley, a golden eagle soared effortlessly, wings stretched wide against the sky. It circled the cliffs where its massive nest clung to the rock, now empty of the strange items that had once captured the world's attention. The camera was gone, the shredded backpack, too. What remained was only nature, unbothered, unburdened, and as untamed as ever. The eagle glided along thermal currents, dipping and rising, its cry piercing the fading quiet like a sharp, beautiful note. It moved with the same grace and mystery that had drawn Alex to film it that fateful day. From a distance, the mountain looked exactly as it had a year ago, unchanged, breathtaking, and unforgiving. The tragedy had not scarred it. The wind still moved through the trees. The sun still warmed the stone. Hikers continued to arrive, drawn by the promise of solitude and wonder. Few would know the story of the young man who had once stood on those same ledges with wide eyes and a heart full of awe. But the mountain remembered, in its own way, not with sorrow, but with silence. In the final moments of a documentary recounting the events, a soft voice narrated over sweeping aerial footage, "In nature, nothing is lost. Even those who vanish leave traces, in memories, in the land, in the stories we pass on." The camera panned out, pulling higher and higher until the trail, the forest, and finally the peaks themselves became small against the vast expanse of the horizon. The last image was that of the eagle, soaring alone against a backdrop of fire-tinted clouds, vanishing slowly into the light. There was no music, only wind and birdsong, and the distant murmur of a river hidden among the trees. No dramatic ending, no simple resolution, only the enduring presence of the wilderness and the quiet understanding that some places are beautiful not because they are safe, but because they are wild. And in that wildness, Alex had found something eternal.